Welcome to the third episode in a Legendarium series about Elizabeth Woodville. In Part 3, The Princes in the Tower, we will talk about how the death of King Edward IV turned the life of his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, upside down. Despite the grievous losses she endured after the 1470 coup by Warwick the Kingmaker, Queen Elizabeth Woodville found herself back on the throne in 1471. To make certain a second coup would not take place, King Edward IV ordered the deposed Henry VI, now back in the Tower of London, to be beaten to death with clubs, to avoid leaving incriminating wounds. The Yorkists claimed that King Henry VI died of melancholy, and being beaten to death would certainly not improve one's mood. Back in the royal palace, Queen Elizabeth Woodville returned to the main function of a queen having children. During the decade that followed, she begat two more daughters and a son in 1473 named Richard, Duke of York. Yet even in an age of casual royal adultery, her husband, King Edward IV, distinguished himself as a Lothario. He had numerous casual flings, 3 mistresses on the side, and one rumored relationship with a man named Henry Beaufort. To keep her crown, Queen Elizabeth Woodville turned a blind eye to her husband's shameless philandering. Additionally, George, Duke of Clarence, became even more unstable after 1471 when his wife died in childbirth. He began recklessly pursuing rich women at court. Elizabeth, who resented George for his role in the 1470 coup which killed her kinsman, thwarted him at every turn. Furious, the Duke of Clarence left court and reportedly began plotting against his brother and his wife for a second time. Eventually, the king arrested one of Duke George's associates, an astrologer. After some friendly persuasion in the torture chamber, the astrologer confessed to using black magic to imagine the king's death. Urged on by Queen Elizabeth Woodville, who longed for revenge against Clarence for murdering her kinsman during the 1470 coup, King Edward IV locked his brother up in the Tower of London, and supposedly on his wife's advice, King Edward IV had Clarence drowned in a barrel of Malmsey wine. During the years after the York dynasty's restoration to power, Elizabeth Woodville invested heavily in acts of Christian charity and piety. She also said the Angelus devotion 3 times a day and involved herself in the upbringing of her children. This normalcy ended during April 1483. That month, Elizabeth's husband, King Edward IV, died under mysterious circumstances at just 40 years of age after a fishing trip. To this day, it is unknown for certain how he died, yet the consequences for Elizabeth Woodville proved dire. In the king's will, Edward IV appointed his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the Lord Protector for his 12-year-old son, Prince Edward, now King Edward V. Queen Elizabeth arranged for her brother and a son from her first marriage, Richard Grey, to bring King Edward V to London for his coronation. Duke Richard met them there, and after a night of drinking and merrymaking, Richard arrested the 2 Grey men for treason. He told his bewildered and disbelieving nephew Edward that he did this to protect him, and then hurried King Edward to the Tower of London. Elizabeth Woodville did not trust her brother-in-law and hurried once more to Westminster Abbey with her other son Richard and her 5 daughters. Elizabeth Woodville took so much of the royal treasury with her that the monks had to knock out abbey walls to hold it. Meanwhile, Richard of Gloucester surrounded Westminster Abbey with his soldiers and began appointing his flunkies to positions of power, especially the Tower of London. Richard of Gloucester also wrote to other aristocrats, urging them not to allow the Woodville family, mere commoners, to monopolize access to King Edward V. Only he, Richard of Gloucester, could assure good government, or so Duke Richard said, and many aristocrats believed. Surrounded by Duke Richard's men, Elizabeth Woodville made a decision that has baffled both contemporaries and historians. After receiving a guarantee from Richard of Gloucester that her younger son would be safe, Elizabeth Woodville handed over her son Richard to the Duke, who put him in the Tower of London. Supposedly, Richard would help to prepare for his brother's coronation and keep the young King Edward company. During the weeks that followed, even as Elizabeth remained in Westminster, Duke Richard appeared to keep his word, making all the public preparations for the coronation. Suddenly, in June, a bishop announced that he uncovered letters showing that King Edward IV promised to marry another of his mistresses before marrying Elizabeth Woodville. This made the king's marriage invalid under law and custom of the time, the two princes illegitimate, and, surprise, surprise, suddenly the only available and legitimate heir became their uncle, Duke Richard of Gloucester. Instead of King Edward V being coronated, King Richard III took the throne. This stunning and brazen coup even split a Yorkist court inured to intrigue and political violence. What happened to the princes in the Tower remains unknown, but no one saw them after mid-July 1483, when members of King Richard's own court began talking up the two boys as possible replacements for the illegitimate Richard III. Richard III then deprived Elizabeth Woodville of her royal title and her lands. The king even declared her 5 surviving daughters illegitimate and unable to inherit property, and that Elizabeth Woodville herself would henceforth be known as Dame Elizabeth Grey, in reference to her first husband. After holding out hope that her sons might emerge from the Tower, she gave up, and by autumn 1483, Elizabeth Woodville accepted that she would never see her sons again, and like the rest of the kingdom, she believed that Richard III had murdered her sons to take the throne. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.